Are you guys good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 6:31, and Eric, I'll look to you to take the roll.
Okay. So Chair Cash Parker here. Alexander Dukeman
Here.
Matt Crabtree is currently absent. Melinda Ellswick.
Here.
Ken Chu.
Here.
And then Joe Frigola is absent. We'll have an update on Joe later. Eric is here for staff. Eric Sampson, Layer 2 with City of Inglewood, and Brian Isom, Planning Manager with City of Inglewood is here, and also Lindsey Flewelling with the State Historic Preservation Office.
Thanks, Eric. So the first item, there's 2 minutes on here because the last meeting there were folks present to vote on the May 15th minutes. So let's start with the May 15th minutes. Is there any discussion on those? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the May 15th, 2024 minutes?
Motion to approve?
Moved by Ken. Is there a second?
Well, second.
Seconded by Melinda. All in favor of approving the May 15th, 2024 minutes, say aye.
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 I wasn't there.
You don't have to have been there. Just to,
No, like,
okay.
yeah, if you ever miss a meeting,
Even if I wasn't like on the commission yet?
correct. Yeah, no, because the current commission is voting to approve these.
Okay.
So I'm not pressuring you to vote one way or the other, but you can vote yes, you can vote no if you're comfortable with that.
but yeah, if you've ever missed a meeting and but you've perused the minutes and think they're okay, you feel free to vote on them.
Okay, yeah, I'll approve.
Okay.
Melinda, was that aye from you also? So I
Yes.
think it's ayes.
Okay, so that's, yep.
So that motion carries. The May 15th minutes are approved.
Can you turn up the speaker volume?
That's what, is it this one?
Sorry, I couldn't back
I thought it was that. I could be wrong. I'm sorry, Brian.
Is that Matt?
Oh, I'll go ahead and see.
here. Oh, Matt's here. I got it.
Yep, okay.
Action for myself.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to see, it's hard to see out the windows.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Right place.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, you didn't miss anything except the approval of the May
Oh, sorry.
15th.
Couple
minutes.
minutes.
Actually, I'll have you sit over here because Lindsay's going to be using this.
I guess I could have just sat. Oh.
Okay, so welcome to Matt, who's now present.
Yep.
Sorry,
Eric will
couple minutes late here.
All right. That brings us to the approval of the August 21st minutes. Is there any discussion about the August 21st minutes?
Well, I have some comments. It's always me, right? I wasn't present, but I noticed that Matt's name is misspelled and the start time is listed as 6. But no wonder I was late.
So it sounds like there's a misspelling of a name and the start time's wrong on the August 21st minutes. I didn't see that, but
Whose name is misspelled?
yeah, whose name is misspelled? Sorry, Melinda, the volume on the speaker is really low in here.
Matthew's name.
Well, the only other comment I had was that the start time is listed at 6 p.m.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on the minutes besides those 2 changes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes with those 2 revisions?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's been a motion to approve the minutes with the 2 revisions. Melinda suggested in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Melinda, are you aye?
No, I'm an abstain. I wasn't present.
Okay, so I think that's 4 ayes and 1 abstention. So that motion carries with the amendments. And Eric, I assume you'll make the amendments to the minutes that Melinda raised. Okay. That brings us to public forum. I don't see anyone from the public in the room. I don't see anyone online. Am I right about that, Eric?
You are correct.
Okay. That brings us to number 4, which is our study session item, the CLG, and Lindsey Flewelling is here. Welcome. I'll turn the floor over to you. I'll scoot over so we can the center there.
And then should I share the screen with someone?
Yep. Yeah, totally.
And I assume before you start, you'll introduce yourself. I think some of the commissioners were here for your last presentation, but some weren't.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Lindsey Flewelling. I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator from History Colorado. And my actual job title is Preservation Planner, but that kind of is meaningless and, you know, what I actually do. But yeah, my primary role is to work with local governments around the state on their preservation programs. And as you were saying, I was last here virtually. I just looked, it was July of 2023, so. Happy to actually be here in person. So the Certified Local Government Program is a federal program that's run through each state. And it's essentially a partnership program with the local government, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the National Park Service at the federal level. At the state level, each state has its own State Historic Preservation Office, which is at History Colorado. And then we also call it the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, which are all the same thing, just like have as many names as possible for one office. And then of course, local governments at the local level. There's currently 67 certified local governments in Colorado. You can see here there's 6 counties plus Broomfield and Denver, so technically 8 counties, and then the rest are municipalities around the state. And then there are about 2,100 nationwide. So we have a pretty robust program for a state of our population size. You all know this, I'm sure, but just you know, to have the background to historic preservation generally, at the federal level, it defines preservation for all of us nationwide. Historic preservation is the study, documentation, designation, protection, and physical preservation of buildings, structures, which are other you know, things that people can use but aren't buildings, like you know, like mining structures and bridges and things like that. Sites that can be archaeological sites, battlefields, objects, which are things like statues. We actually just designated a mural as an object, as the historic mural. The mural was important historically, but the building it was on was not, so just the mural is designated actually. And then districts are collections of all those other types of resources. Our national policy for preservation was passed in 1966 with the National Historic Preservation Act. That's what gave the power for preservation to the National Park Service at the federal level, and then created the state historic preservation offices in each state. And then that was amended in 1980 to add the Certified Local Government Program as a local partnership to have those 3 tiers. And these are some of the things that each local preservation program should contain. So you'll have your local preservation ordinance that forms your Historic Preservation Commission and lets you know your powers and duties, as well as defining your relationship with your governing bodies. So some Historic Preservation Commissions are more of an advisory group that then their town board or city council has to actually approve of everything that they decide on. And then some have more autonomy. And then the city council will just be like the group that people go to if they need to appeal a decision. Other elements of your local preservation program will be surveys, so finding out what you have in your local area so that you're able to actually move forward with doing other preservation related activities like designation or review of alterations and demolition. Designation, so creating local landmarks or local historic districts. Design review, that's review of alterations, relocation, and demolition of properties. Usually it's on designated properties, but some local governments also review demolition for any properties that are 50 years or older. And that way they can like protect from demolition generally. Incentives, many local governments have different preservation incentives, but those can also be layered with incentives at the state and federal level. So we have like the State Historical Fund and then the state and federal tax credits as well as some other incentives like incentives that go along with preservation easements and things like that. And then local governments can also put in their own incentives like different tax breaks or low interest loans and grant programs and things like that. And then advocacy and public education, so reaching out to your local property owners and residents and making sure people like know that they're in an area that is historic and have that community spirit around the history of their local area. So of course you can do all of those things without being a CLG, and I'm sure you all do, since you've had different grants and are pretty active. But the Certified Local Government Program is sort of, a next step up as far as being, having more support from the state and more resources available to you. So the main benefits of the CLG program, we have specific Certified Local Government grants. Our office gets funding from the National Park Service, and we're required to give at least 10% of that funding to the certified local governments in the form of subgrants. And then we're really lucky in Colorado to have the State Historical Fund, so they actually match our grant amount from the National Park Service so that we can provide no match grants to the local governments. And these are for things like preservation plans, survey projects, design guidelines. If you wanted to designate a property to like the National or State Register, you could hire somebody to write the nomination, and then education and outreach projects. So specifically projects that benefit your local government preservation program and kind of help you gain momentum with your program. And those are for up to $25,000, and we just have one grant round a year every January. You're also eligible for National Park Service preservation grants. They have kind of a wide range of grants available. They do survey and designation work as well, but they also fund some physical construction work. There are a little bit more barriers to applying for National Park Service grants. If you've ever worked with grants.gov, you will know why. Not the easiest system, but it is a CLG benefit, and the National Park Service staff that works on that are very enthusiastic about working with local governments if you ever have a project that comes to mind for those. And then a big one is that your locally landmarked properties and any contributing properties in local historic districts are eligible for the state commercial and residential tax credits. Those are currently worth up to 25% of qualified rehabilitation expenditures. So essentially anybody who's trying to rehabilitate their house or their commercial property would get a quarter of the money back in tax credits through the state's residential and commercial tax credit program. So it's a big benefit for the CLGs specifically. And that we just had legislation passed in May that makes the program easier to use. And the residential ones will actually become refundable. So instead of like making sure you have that amount of tax liability, you can actually get the money back. And so that's really one of the only incentives for residential properties. And I think that's a pretty big selling point. The CLG program, especially, like you guys have really great historic residences, so that might be helpful to your people locally. And then any property that has some kind of public benefit can apply for State Historical Fund grants, whether you're in a CLG or not. That is a big benefit in Colorado that most other states don't have access to. Another benefit is access to Compass, which is our cultural resource database. So essentially, like any highway project or government project that may have gone through and needed to survey properties, we've got a collection of all their past forms that they filled out, so you can find out what other people have already done. So you don't have to like reinvent the wheel if CDOT has already filled out, 500 forms for buildings here in the city. Training, I do a webinar every month, and then we also offer scholarships for the Saving Places Conference and the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. So there's some training support there for our local governments. Technical preservation support, so if you ever have questions about like best practices for historic preservation, you can reach out to me and I'll find the person in our office who is best qualified to answer that. That can be things like, I had one recently from Westminster where they were asking about, they had some graffiti on a historic masonry building. So they wanted to know about graffiti removal products, but also like coatings to prevent graffiti in the future. Or like, what's the best way to add an elevator on the outside of this historic schoolhouse? Things like that. There's a formal role in the National Register review process, and then a formal role in the Section 106 process, which is essentially whenever a project is either funded by the federal government or licensed by the federal government, then they're required to reach out to the CLG to see if you guys feel like it will negatively affect historic resources. So that's usually like highway projects, like HUD-funded housing projects, and then cell towers are also a really big one. On the flip side, we have the responsibilities of the CLG program. So the first one is to enforce your own local preservation ordinance. A big part of my job is to go around and make sure everybody's just following their own rules that they've set for themselves. So it's fairly basic, but more questions come up about that than maybe you would think. Establish and maintain a commission. CLGs are required to have at least 5 members on their commission and meet at least 4 times a year, which is a challenge for some, but others meet way more than 4 times a year, so that just kind of depends. Send meeting minutes to our office. I read everybody's meeting minutes and see if there are common issues coming up that maybe would be good for a webinar, or sometimes I'll read the minutes and somebody at the meeting will be like, oh, I wonder if that could be a state historical fund grant, and then I'll be like, please talk to this outreach person, you know, to try to make sure I'm responding to any needs of the local governments. Provide for adequate public participation, so just following all open meetings laws and making sure that, you know, like there's time in your agenda for the public to comment. Maintain a system of survey and inventory. We normally expect our local governments to have some kind of survey project every 10 years. Doesn't have to be like the whole city or anything, but just making sure that you're staying on top of survey projects, and especially if you're facing a lot of change, which I'm sure Inglewood is, making sure that you are staying on top of that and know what you have as far as historic resources go. And those are eligible for CLG grants and state historical fund grants. So we're happy to help, you know, help you maintain a system of survey and inventory as well. One person from your commission needs to attend a training at least once per year. It can be any of the webinars or Saving Places or any like preservation related training. There's not like a specific one that people have to attend. And then every year there's an annual report due, usually that staff fills out. So that's the summary of the benefits and responsibilities. As far as the steps to becoming a CLG, draft and adopt a historic preservation ordinance, which you guys already have, appoint a commission and start meeting, which you're already doing, have a list of preservation goals. Just in the application, it asks for like 5 to 6 things that you would want to accomplish within the next like 5 to 8 years. And you have already done some preservation planning work, so you could just attach that or just have like a bullet point list of some things that you're working toward. Helps me know that you have direction and you know, are building up momentum on different projects. And then there's a application and the status request memo, which is essentially like you just fill in, you know, Inglewood in the memo part. And then adopt a resolution to become a CLG. We review all the materials at our office, and the Park Service reviews all the materials on their end. And then the certification agreement is signed by the local government in our office, and then Park Service sends a letter that's concurring that that it should be a CLG. So those are the basic steps, but you're already past the biggest hurdle, which is getting an ordinance adopted. Yeah, and then here's my contact information. And that was all I had as far as the presentation goes, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. Who has questions for Lindsey?
We've heard the presentation a few times thus far. There's been concern and question about, I think this was from previous city management, about giving up, what do we give up in the process of becoming a CLG? The original path for our commission was that, well, we don't want to be CLG, but we want a historic preservation commission, so we set the path forward, so we do it ourselves. And largely that motivation, I think, was we would give up something if we became a CLG. So is there any catch to becoming a CLG? Is there anything that we give up as a community, local authority, anything along those lines? Because I know that if there is opposition, that'll probably be where it's at.
Yeah, so there's no, I don't approve your certificates of appropriateness. There's no additional oversight other than I go in and check that you're following your own ordinance. But there's no loss of control over you guys making decisions over properties in your own city. Yeah, there's no additional role for the state as far as having power over your historic properties. The real barrier, I would say, is staff capacity and staff time for just reporting purposes and things like that. But I try to keep that as minimal as possible. But there is the annual report every year, and then sending meeting minutes over and things like that. And then there's an evaluation every 4 years to make sure that you're still fitting the parameters of the CLG program.
So also our ordinance was largely written to mimic many CLGs across the state, really. So we have a lot of that there in our ordinance currently. But I feel like we are constantly kind of battling and this has obviously become a much bigger issue of recent, but we're battling the constant push for development, right? And my question is, historically designated property within the city of Inglewood, not a CLG, versus a historically designated property within the city of Lakewood. Is there a difference to the authority that exists there? Is there's something that Lakewood has that Inglewood doesn't have when it comes to the authority of designation?
The main thing is that tax credit incentives and grants available to the CLGs, and then if there is that federal project that might impact historic resources, then the CLG is automatically part of the consultation.
Okay, so this is more funding than it is anything else.
Yeah, it's more about incentives
All right, that's good to
and
know.
resources and partnership.
Yeah, okay.
I have a couple of questions. Again, thank you for the presentation. And so I think is probably Eric or Brian or both told you, because we have this ordinance that was passed last fall that actually gave our commission authority to designate landmarks and so forth. What we're working through now is how to present this to city council, the concept of the CLG. I mean, it's been presented in the past, but we have a different council and a different opportunity now. So the annual report you mentioned, you said usually that's staff that completes that, city staff. What does that look like, the annual report? Is it dense? It sounds like it's pretty simple. Tell us about that.
So some CLGs don't have staff, so obviously they just have the commission fill it out if needed. But essentially there's how many projects did you review this year? There's two sections of designated properties, and then some CLGs separately review demolition. Denver has thousands of demolition cases a year, so they have a separate number that they put in that section. And then how many times did you meet? So I can tell if you met that 4 times a year requirement. What are the qualifications for the people on your commission? So the CLGs are supposed to have at least 40% of their commission members be preservation professionals. But I would say that requirement is waived in probably at least half of our local governments. I mean, Kiowa County doesn't have preservation professionals
I mean,
to draw from
Yeah,
necessarily.
I can tell, we don't have 40% of our commission
Yeah.
as preservation professionals. I think we have one person who's a professional on this commission.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. The thing that I always ask, like during the evaluation, is do you have somebody that you can ask for help if you need it? So sometimes that means like if you really needed help, the city could hire an outside consultant, or like you have a historic society that has expertise that you can turn to. Maybe there's like a local college professor that has expertise that you could turn to if you really needed extra expertise in different areas. And that's really, and like if it's a Main Street community, they're like, oh, we just turn to Main Street if we have questions. So there are different avenues to get around that requirement. So yeah, it asks about that, and then it says there's a section on like, what is your biggest accomplishment from the past year? What are some problems or concerns that have come up in the past year? And then what are you going to do next year? What are your plans?
Second question, you mentioned surveys and you said every 10 years is typically the standard. How in-depth do those surveys have to be?
So it varies wildly, like depending on the size of the community. And what I look for is just that there is some kind of survey activity. So I'm not looking for necessarily like specifically in depth. If you only did like one property over 10 years, that would be bad. But just that there's some kind of momentum on getting your properties inventoried. But it could be, I know you guys have a survey plan, but it could be like different neighborhoods that you look at, or it could be thematic. So if you wanted to do like every church or every school, you could look at things like that, or like auto tourism properties would be a great here. So it doesn't have to be super in-depth, it's just like some kind of momentum on survey projects.
Yeah, I mean, as you know from coming to a previous meeting, Inglewood got a grant to do a survey recently, and I'm just anticipating questions that council might ask us or these gentlemen from the staff of how much is this gonna cost? Do we have to spend $1 million every 10 years to do a survey? And it sounds like the answer is clearly not.
No.
Yeah.
And we can apply for grants
Yes.
for those surveys, right?
Yeah, and it's, you know, intended to offset the costs that are associated with that, so. And hopefully our grant amounts will go up over time too, so.
And then my third question, the tax credits you mentioned, just to be perfectly clear about that, which it sounds like those tax credits are getting even more enticing because they're gonna become refundable, but you have to have a historically designated property that is designated by a certified local government to be eligible for that. Is
Or
that
a state or
correct?
national register.
Okay.
And then those for residential properties, those are all reviewed through our office. And there's no limit on funding for the ones for residential properties. The project cap is $100,000 or less for residential projects. And then you can get up to 25% back currently. And then commercial projects are a little bit more complicated. They go through our office and the Office of Economic Development and International Trade as well.
You know, I've always looked at the CLG and looked at, obviously there's a benefit to the preserving the homes and the kind of the 1920s bungalow styles and that area that Ringwood really grew. But from the standpoint of Broadway and the importance that's coming back onto the 3400 block of Broadway, we've managed to save that for, despite a lot of things that's been saved, but there's a lot of buildings that could definitely, you know, benefit from restoration.
Yeah.
And that probably actually for Inglewood would be one of the bigger selling points, is that encouraging local business by, you know, kind of updating that area and restoring it.
Yeah, and there's, they just added an extra pool for commercial projects that also have a housing element too. Mm-hmm. So there's more money available for that. I think starting at, there's a whole bunch of dates, but I believe that starts in 2026. So that'll be a really great thing to have as well.
Is the example ordinance available somewhere that?
Yeah, I can send it.
Yeah, that'd be kind of neat to review that, because I know that's going to be To Cash's point, trying to predict the questions that are gonna come up. I'm sure the ordinance, will get scrutinized considerably.
Yeah, I haven't read over your new ordinance, so I have to look at that, but essentially we would require that there's some kind of process for designating properties, and then CLGs are required to have some kind of design review element in their ordinance. That can be either voluntary or mandatory, so essentially, like if somebody wanted a building permit for the exterior of their house, they would need to come to you for, if it's voluntary, they'd be coming to you for advice on like best practices and like what they theoretically should do, but they could still get a building permit anyway. And then if it's mandatory, then they have to follow what you say in order to get a building permit.
And just to be clear, that's the CLG kind of enacting CLG ordinance,
Oh, okay, yeah, no, there's a resolution.
yeah, because there's gotta be a resolution more than.
Yeah, the resolution is just like,
So, you guys
we
are,
would like to be a CLG.
don't want to
basically.
backhand words into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our ordinance does all those things. I was
Yeah.
gonna jump in. Yeah, you're looking for
The
the
resolution.
resolution.
The resolution and
designating.
enacting and
Yes.
designating.
It's-
Yeah, that's more, I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was done by ordinance or by resolution.
Yeah, it's, no problem there, but yeah, I can definitely send the sample resolution over.
Yeah.
That's what's gonna get scrutinized, I would expect, because that's gonna spell out a lot of the things that probably tie into our existing ordinance, but then, have to physically fit, I would assume.
I wouldn't say that it's overly detailed.
It kind of would be, it's a standalone resolution, it wouldn't be
Yeah.
in our ordinance. It basically is just saying, at least my assumption is, hey, this is what we want to do. Please scrutinize all of our ordinances and
Right.
make sure that we're okay so that we can go through this process.
Right, and then if you no longer want to be a CLG, you just pass another resolution saying that that previous one is
Right.
void.
That was gonna be my next point or question, is that it's revocable at any time. But yeah, so the designating, if the council agrees, the council doesn't have to pass an ordinance putting something in the municipal code saying we're a CLG.
Right.
It's just a resolution that reflects that we check off all the boxes for it and wish to be a CLG.
Yeah, and that makes it less complicated if you decide not to in the future too.
Right.
So the updating of Title 16 has been done. So
Yeah,
we don't have to go through
yes.
that.
That's all.
Yeah, because it's a very relevant question, because I think council will ask exactly that question or those questions about how.
Yeah,
how
I'll
that
send
all
over
works.
all the documents, the application form and the status request memo.
So just to be clear, kind of Cash, what you were bringing up earlier, like, the people who would be eligible for grants or tax credits or anything would be people who have already come through us for designation, is that correct?
I think that's right. You have to be
Yes.
designated through
Yeah.
the local process, right?
And then, so if they're applying for credits or grants, do we have any involvement in that as well, or is that you guys and we don't have to deal with that?
You don't have to deal with it if you don't want to. We do have some CLGs that review residential tax credit applications, like Denver does, and City of Boulder, but like Fort Collins doesn't and Colorado Springs doesn't. Those all get processed directly through our office. But if you felt like you wanted to review them, you could. Generally, as like a newer CLG, I would recommend not, because you have to be comfortable reviewing interior changes. And I feel like, let our office be the bad guy and telling people what to do with their kitchen update or whatever, and like what historic features they are supposed to save, rather than, I don't feel comfortable reviewing somebody's kitchen plans personally.
I'm also, the way that our ordinance is structured, I'm not aware of anything in our ordinance that gives us any power to look at or weigh in on an application for a tax credit, right? And I think, I'm not providing legal advice, and I would leave it to the city attorney to do that. But it seems to me that our ordinance would have to specifically give us the power or charge us to do that, which I imagine is the situation like in Denver, for instance, that their ordinance says you, Historic Preservation Commission or whatever they call it in Denver, will look at and review these tax credit applications. We don't have, I don't think we could do that even if we wanted to, is my point,
Not-
with the way our ordinance
Yeah,
is
not
set up.
currently. It's actually a resolution process to be able to review them if you wanted to. But generally wouldn't recommend that, like, starting out. If you start to see a ton of tax credit projects and want it to be more of like a one-stop shop with your planning department, where people are coming in anyway, and it's like, well, you just get reviewed and it's a great incentive, then you can certainly adopt.
If the tax credit project results in changes to the exterior of the building, then you all would need to see
Yes.
this when it comes back for a building permit to give it a
Right.
certificate of appropriateness.
Yeah.
So you would at some point see it, but only if they're changing the outside, because our ordinance, they're changing the inside, we don't cover the inside of their home, only if they're touching the exterior.
And they can get tax credits for things like HVAC and like mechanical updates. So some of those, you would never know about, but if they're like putting in new windows or changing or updating their siding, things like that, of course, it would come to you, and our tax credit reviewer always like checks to make sure they actually followed their local processes and they're not just kind of sneaking around and going straight to the state.
So is there an example of, or a more detailed list of what the actual tax credits are associated with each individual kind of category? I would assume it's probably categorized somehow.
Yeah, it's a commercial or residential, but we always say, like, if it's something that, so it needs to be in the original footprint of the building, like any rehabilitation in the original footprint. Like I said, it can be like mechanical and HVAC, plumbing updates and things like that. But if you like turn the building upside down and shake it and things can fall out, those things don't count. Mm-hmm. But if it stays with the building, then that generally counts.
And to what percentage or what degree or what is there? You'd mentioned something about $100,000 and something about $25,000 in that particular equation. I mean, how does that work if we were asked by the council member tomorrow? Well, what kind of tax benefits are we talking about? Yeah. Is it?
I can send you over a flyer, but essentially with the residential tax credits, it's if you were doing a project for up to $100,000 that you're spending on the project, you could get 25% back of that expenditure. For commercial projects, it's a little bit more complicated. So there's like 2 tiers, but like the first 2 million, you get 25% back, and then the second 1 million, you get 20% back, essentially.
And devil's advocate on this one here, that's available now, the same thing or not? If we are not CLG, because there is funding that is available from the state.
So tax credits are just CLG.
Just CLG for tax
or
credits.
State or national register properties. So like.
Okay, so on top of that, there is additional funding that is available from the state.
So we have the State Historical Fund.
Right.
Those grants are generally for properties that have some kind of public benefit. Mm-hmm. So definitely not like a private residence. Okay. But maybe like potentially a commercial property, properties that are used for like nonprofit groups, community spaces. If it's like, the most important property on South Broadway or something that needed to be rehabilitated. So the State Historical Fund funds planning documents, like construction documents, historic structure assessments, and then also the actual physical construction work. Mm-hmm. And those are for up to $250,000. It's anticipated that work will be phased given how much construction work costs, but those require a match as well.
So that's a match and only available to public benefit properties.
Right.
But available now.
Yes.
Okay, so then to continue to kind of characterize this then, so with the CLG, that really gives the access to, the historic benefit, like the benefits with the state for tax or whatever finances to homeowners. That really can't happen elsewhere unless you're really savvy with grants, I'd assume, or at all.
Definitely not through like the State Historical Fund, because it'd be very hard to argue that your personal private residence had a public benefit. Okay. In a competitive manner.
So that just gives access to this too.
Yeah. And then with the tax credits, like let's say you did get a State Historical Fund grant, but you were also eligible for tax credits, you can layer those together. So you'll have multiple incentives on the same project.
That's what I was going to ask, if you could stack local tax credits and national tax credits.
Yes, so people, if you have a National Register property, you could get a State Historical Fund grant and your 25% state commercial tax credit, and if you're National Register, 20% federal tax credit, so you get 45% back, plus having a grant, plus whatever other, if it's a low-income housing project or.
Yeah, we
any
see a lot
other-
of LIHTC projects that stack.
Yeah, I
Grant
mean,
funding.
we really have to get all those things in line to
Exactly.
make them fundable, but.
What about that bullet point about us needing a plan or something? Do we have goals or a plan?
Yeah, you guys are good on that.
Oh, we have that?
Yeah.
Okay. And does that need to be renewed like every?
No, I mean, I ask, like, during the evaluation, so every 4 years, I always ask, like, are you following your preservation plan? Do you do like an annual work plan? Is there some kind of guidance or direction, so that, sometimes the commissions just like meet, but they don't really have anything to talk about. And then people start leaving because they don't want to be a commission member if you're just like, oh, if we approve the minutes, okay. So, it's good to have some kind of direction when you're starting off in different projects to work on and like grants to apply for and things.
And are we subject to any like audits from you at all?
So yeah, there's the evaluation process. I wouldn't say it's an audit per se. Just that like, if you definitely aren't following your ordinance, then you'd be on like probation with the CLG program, but has really no like, no real effect on you other than that it'll bother your staff members more. You're like, follow your own design guidelines, guys. But yeah, that's the audit. And then if you were reviewing tax credits, we try to do an audit on those to make sure you're actually following the Secretary of the Interior standards, but I don't think that that's a huge issue. And yeah, it's fairly difficult to get decertified from like our point of view, but it, I guess, happens once in a while, like if a commission is just no longer meeting at all.
What, I think, and I've been actually asked this before, what does, like, certified local government, that is for a historic preservation entity that's encouraging historic preservation, it's an interesting name, and a lot of people have a hard time, I think, understanding the correlation between whatever certified local government is versus, the state historical fund or whatever, that's.
Yeah.
What's the history of, do you know the history of the certified local government name? Or?
Just that the program was added to the National Historic Preservation Act in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they were like, well, it's a local government that's certified by the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office. Okay. But yeah, it's not the best program name as far as knowing what it means. Yeah. But yeah, your preservation program fits in with federal and state parameters for local preservation programs.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, it's like nobody knows what certified local government means.
Yeah. Well, it does. It sounds interesting.
Yeah.
To say the least. So yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't necessarily sound like it has anything to do with preservation.
Yeah. That's.
So I have a question. The grant that the city could receive to actually implement this, was that the grant, I believe you said one of them was only available once a year?
The CLG grant we offer every January.
Okay.
But yeah, every certified local government is eligible to apply for that.
Okay, and then we're eligible once a year for that?
Yeah, you can apply every year if you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, we have some, like Cortez is super active. They always apply every single year for a survey. They always have like something going. Usually people like wait until their project's over before they apply again, but yeah.
Okay.
You're definitely welcome to apply every year.
Well, arguably, like a survey would be a property survey along across the city. Is that what kind of survey that would be?
Yeah, so it's looking at, we have 2 levels of survey, reconnaissance level and then intensive. But intensive level surveys do a history of the use and ownership of that property. So if it's like a commercial property, it would look at like every business that was ever in that property over the years. If it's a residence, it would look at the property owners like through the census and the, like if they showed up in old newspaper articles and things like that. And then it also looks at the construction history. So if it was a property that had like an addition put on or different changes over time.
Individual property only, not.
Right, so, but a survey project, if you're doing like an intensive level survey, you do like 25 properties, you know, along a main street, or if there were like particularly outstanding properties like in an architect designed residential neighborhood. Like I said, you could do like churches or schools or any kind of like institutional buildings as well. And it just looks into the history, like I said, both of like the use of the property and changes over time, and then of the changes to the actual physical building over time.
Interesting.
And then the recon forms are pretty basic, but it's like, this was the use in basic terms, and like some changes that we can see are different from how it was historically.
Okay.
We can also apply for a grant, I think you said, to like do like promotion and marketing efforts on
Yeah.
like the tax credits and things like that, right?
Yeah, or, you know, like property owner basics for historic preservation, or I'm trying to think of our education and outreach projects recently, but Cortez again did a walking tour podcast with the CLG grant.
Oh, cool.
So they used all the information they'd collected with their myriad survey projects and put that together in 3 walking tour podcasts that people get through their, it's actually on the like local radio station website and local historical society. You can do, we've got like realtor outreach brochures that people have done. Right now, Otero County is doing a 3rd grade workbook. So they've also collected all this historic information over the years about different properties and like different communities that have lived in Otero County. And they really wanted the 3rd graders to see themselves in their history books. So they got permission from, I think they have 3 school districts in the county to put this workbook together and distribute it. And they'll have enough copies for 3 years of 3rd graders. And then they have a teacher workbook that goes along with that. So that's a great one. And then we have currently the town of Saguache, which is in the San Luis Valley, is doing Adobe workshops, but you could also do like historic window workshops or things like that for property owners if that would be helpful.
That's cool.
It's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, the Adobe ones were really cool because it's not just like, a lot of times you'll see like brick making as a example, but this is actually like going to people's houses and showing them how they can maintain different parts of their Adobe homes, which is just like not a very prevalent skill anymore. So it's really helping people stay in their historic homes. Yeah, that's all sorts of different projects that you could do.
Other questions for Lindsey?
I
Melinda?
did have one kind of question. I know that Arapahoe Acres is at least a historic state historic district, might be on the National Register. But and I believe that people that live there are getting tax credits. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I think that there are at least 2 tax credit projects currently in Arapahoe Acres, and I think they are on the National Register, so they are able to just apply straight to our office for tax credit purposes. But if you, so they're able to just apply straight to History Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Would there be any other added benefit with Arapahoe Acres if we became a CLG on top of what they have?
Not for, I mean, since they're already on the National Register, not for like construction incentives, but you could work with them to do outreach projects or, you know, an updated survey, things like that, if there is property owner interest.
Anything else? Melinda, did you have anything else?
No, that was basically it. Thank you for clarifying some things for us.
course.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation again, appreciate that, it's very informative. Unless there's any objection, I think what I'd like to see on the agenda next month, Eric and Brian, is, and you can set it up however makes sense, is a discussion or a plan on how to take this to council, because I think we're at that point again, and this was sort of the first step toward that, and I think we've answered a lot of the questions that I would anticipate council asking of us if we present this, so I'd like to work on that next month, and I don't know if that means getting on a study session agenda with council, and who's going to put together what, whether it's commissioners or staff or us working together to get in front of council to do that. But again, unless anyone disagrees, I think that should be our next step, because what I've heard again tonight is there's only benefits, there's not drawbacks to becoming a CLG given where our ordinance stands.
Well, aside from staff time.
You guys are doing all right.
We get paid to be here, so. My only question is, Lindsey, would you be available for a council meeting if we?
Yeah, definitely. You guys are easy to get to and everything, so.
That's what everybody from right down the street in Denver tells us. It's right here.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
But yeah, otherwise, if you want to email me those documents, and then I can forward it out to the rest of the commission, so you can all take a look at those before our next meeting.
Yeah, is there anything else that would be helpful? So I'll do the sample resolution, the application form, and that status memo. And then you guys already have preservation planning documents, which you could attach, but I'll also do like the sample bullet point preservation plans that people often do.
Sure.
Yeah, anything else? Oh, I can send a copy of this year's annual report if you want to see.
Yeah,
like,
that'd be great.
what that looks
that'd be
like.
good.
And then can we get a copy of this presentation that you?
Oh, definitely, yep.
In addition, any of the financial benefit, like the tax benefit things, so we can have a kind of
Yes.
that in writing, so both
Yeah.
from the residential side and the commercial side.
Yeah, flyer.
And the grants. The grant opportunities.
Yes.
Great.
Oops.
Well, thank you again for your time and for your follow-up work. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and if any questions come up next time, just feel free to reach out.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay, great. You're welcome to join us for what hopefully will not be too much longer for the remainder of our meeting, but feel free to take off as well. Thank you again for your time and presentation.
Yeah,
Really
thanks for
appreciate
having me.
it. Yeah. Staff's choice. Eric, Brian, you have anything?
So I did get an email from Joe Fregola earlier this week, and he has resigned from the board. He is retired and is spending most of his time traveling, it sounds like, so kudos to him, but it is a bummer that we're down a member. But that will be advertised, and hopefully we'll get a replacement in soon. And that is all I have.
And Eric, I think I asked you this when we were off the record. That is the only vacancy on the commission, right?
Yep.
It's Joe's with his resignation.
Yep.
Okay. Great.
And then Sergio, I believe, will be here next month to do some training. We have a new commission member. And then there's been some changes to council policy, boards and commissions, including council. So if there's anything that he needs to bring to you all, he'll bring it then.
Okay. That's next month.
Yep.
Yes.
And I'll be like going over Bob's rules of order.
Yeah, that's right, I was just gonna say that, but can we, not that we probably that closely follow Bob's rules or even a whole lot of parliamentary process in our meetings, is there, ahead of that meeting, is it possible for us to get maybe a copy of what the changes are specifically, or should we just talk about it during that meeting?
We can get them from him. If we can send them out, we'll send them to you at the meeting.
Because it'd just be interesting, I mean, I think we have a good idea on how to navigate within Bob's rules, but I'm just kind of curious what the changes are in here.
Is there anything else from you guys?
Okay.
That brings us to Commissioner's Choice, sort of a related point I'll start on. If you weren't here last month and you haven't already, I would encourage you to take a look at the YouTube of the meeting last month, because we had a discussion about being more formal in how we run these meetings now that we're a quasi-judicial board with the power to approve or deny landmark designations, and trying to be a little bit more diligent about following Bob's rules of order, and also how the agendas are structured. It's being done by staff now, which is how it works for the other boards and commissions, and we've done away with the old business, new business distinction, and commissioner's choice is the time to raise questions for staff that weren't otherwise addressed in the course of the meeting, or if you have agenda items that you want to talk about or see for the next month, we're trying to do that in commissioner's choice. So this mirrors kind of the structure of what other boards and commissions do. That's a very nutshell summary of the discussion. There's a little bit more from the meeting last month. Like I said, if you go back and watch that, and Brian and Eric, shared their experience from other boards and commissions and how that works. So we're just trying to run a little bit more formally in view of our still somewhat new power with regard to landmark designations. So that was my commissioner's choice. I'll go around the room, and Matt, I'm looking in your direction. Do you have anything for commissioner's choice?
I do, somewhat delayed, and actually I tried to get a few updates on it, because I think the last time we talked about the historic landmark plaque stuff was like May.
Sounds about right.
And at that point in time, I was still doing, getting pricing back, and of course unfortunately the costs associated with manufacturing things like this are highly variable because of the copper bearing content of these things. So anyway, I do have an update. I can share that right now, or we can dedicate a time at a future meeting to go into detail, because I do believe that there's probably a budgetary element to this that we're going to need to figure out with funding these plaques, because they're substantially more expensive now than they once were.
I think that's probably maybe a discussion for the next meeting, generally speaking, since it involves the budgetary issue.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's put that on the agenda for next time, because it's not like we have a property that's waiting for one right now. So let's put that on the agenda next time and work through that. I guess the only question I have is what's the ballpark?
Well, so there's 3 different ballparks. Okay. Which one? If anybody hasn't seen this, you may not have seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
This is a prototype that was manufactured a couple years ago.
You made it?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Himself.
It's made out of 3/8 inch brass, bronze, 3/8 inch bronze.
That's so heavy.
Practicality of cost of materials then versus the practicality of the cost of materials now is quite a bit different. I'm sure that you've seen this across the different places, but anyway, one of the aspects is, do I continue to make a few more of them? Can I even do that? I think there's an unfortunate legal restriction for me to be able to manufacture. I didn't really want to manufacture these like long-term, because they take a lot of work to make. Probably having supply chain for that, some set of suppliers is probably the best thing for that. But on the area of comparison, apples to apples, for me to make one of those, cost of materials only is about $100. It's not too bad for that, but I think from our previous discussions, that's pretty much not an option anyway. So then we move on to going with a larger manufacturer and using a local company. There are no local companies that I've been able to find in Colorado that do this specifically, but there are local sign companies, which we can go through, that deal with larger national companies that do the manufacturing. Actually, they don't make plaques that thickness. It would actually be 1/4 inch. $230 to $270 a piece. If we went to aluminum, going to a different ballpark, that's what Aurora's doing now. That's between effectively $150 to $170. Aluminum doesn't have the grandeur of bronze. But we can talk about it more, and I think I've got a couple other things that we can talk about at that point, so.
That sounds good. And Eric or Brian, I know we've had this discussion before, but like, if you could find out what budget is available to the commission to do those things, I know that's sort of been a moving target. That would be helpful to know as we have this discussion next time.
Is it possible to get a sample of the aluminum option?
I can show you what a picture of one would look like.
Okay.
Do you mind, Cash? I mean, it's not bad. Of course, picture is.
It's not bad.
It's not good.
Well, I mean, historically, not pun intended, this would be kind of an example of an aluminum sign. So the back would be black in this particular case, and then you'd have the border, and it would be very clearly silver versus the bronze color.
Oh.
So obviously, this is traditional with the bronze ones.
Okay, so this is basically
Bronze, yeah. And this would be, but Aurora's going this route with their plaques, and I think a lot of the other thing to consider too is that right there, you're holding about $100 worth of material. So having that hanging on the outside of a building and attached with 4 screws.
And do you guys talk about the option of making the cost of these a part of the application process or whatever?
Well, I think that's one of the things we have to discuss next month is what, if any, budget do we have available, or is it just gonna fall on a property owner to buy this if they want it, which I think that's probably ultimately gonna be the answer or something close to it, and how it's gonna be offered, if it's gonna be on the website or how that's all gonna work. So I think that's probably part of the discussion for next month.
Yeah. Okay, switching topics, I got something else.
Yeah, sure.
Historic Englewood, the local historic preservation society, is doing their monthly lecture this month. Zach Kellerman, Chairman and CEO of Mount Valor Foundation, will be speaking on the history and misconceptions of PTSD. Zach, an Army OIF veteran, was deployed to Ramadi, Iraq, with the 3rd Infantry. His passion for helping his fellow servicemen led to the establishment of his organization, Mountain Valor Foundation, whose mission is to provide support to wounded veterans and to foster a community that encourages mutual aid. So that's a pretty interesting topic. I'm looking forward to that. So encourage anybody to attend. Also, the Historic Englewood Museum downstairs is open Saturdays 10 to 2. History of Cinderella City. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to stop by. We have a full 3D simulation of the mall as it was in 2 different eras. The first era starting in 1968, and then the second era from 1983 on. And there's a controller, and you can literally sit in front of a 165-inch screen and walk through the mall like you could back then.
Wow, that sounds cool.
That's all I got.
Thanks. Melinda, you're sort of next around the table because the TV's. Do you have anything?
All right. Well, I sort of had a question or comment to Matt, which, according to Bob, I should say, start with point of information. But I suppose I can save it till next week or next month. So otherwise, nothing.
Okay. Thank you. Ken?
Nothing for me.
Alex?
Nothing for me.
I think that brings us to the end then. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So,
Right, there's a motion to adjourn from Matt Crabtree. Is there a second?
Second?
I think Ken got it first, so it's been moved and seconded. So adjourn at 7:35.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you very much again for coming. Appreciate that.
what's that?
Will you send us the information you together on
I-
the cost of
I can
everything?
sure
We'll try to formalize it,
Send
and we
PowerPoint.
might be able to reach out to some other folks and see what costs would be.
Oh, yeah, that'd be
When I was in
fantastic.
Lubbock.
Lindsay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Probably company that